Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to be able to share with you tonight talking about digital learning. Our focus is always about bringing in digital content and digital tools into our classrooms to meet the portrait of a Nevada learner. And today we're going to be really focusing in on station rotation. And I appreciate everybody that's here with us today. And let's go ahead and get started. My name is Kim Loomis. Some of you may know my name and face. I've been around for quite some time here in Clark County School District. I was the former director for online and blended learning. I taught high school math for 10 years, a little bit in California, but a lot here as well. I coached soccer, both boys and girls, and absolutely still love soccer. I was at the Women's World Cup in Sydney and New Zealand this last summer. But my favorite thing to do is exactly what I'm doing. When you retire, they say, you're supposed to follow your passion. Well, I loved what I did. I loved online and blended learning. Now I just get to do it outside of Clark County School District. Matter of fact, later this week, I'm down in North Carolina. I just got back from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and about 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be down in Palm Springs. So that's the nice thing. I still get to do the thing that I absolutely love, but I just do it at a national level. I did write a book. It was called Think Outside the Box, the CIA of Blended Learning, and you guys will get a little bit of that today. No need to buy it. You have the real thing right here. Today's agenda is the welcome, and we had our welcome question. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a portrait of the Nevada learner and go into student-centered learning, hit some blending. And when I talk about blending, that's mean bringing in our digital content and tools into our station rotation, and then how to plan for those stations so that if you're looking for those 5 additional workshop hours, that's inside of our Canvas course. We'll talk a little bit about that. Tonight, you get a 1-hour professional learning certificate for being with us. And then if you want those 5 additional hours, you all got invited. Everybody got invited to the Canvas course. You're welcome to go in and just audit and look at all the cool stuff that's there. Or if you want to take station rotation back into your classroom and implement it and turn in the 1 assignment, you can get those 5 additional hours of credit. As we're working today, remember, you do not have to turn on your cameras when we're in large groups like this, but when we do breakouts, please turn on those cameras. All right, before we get started, in chat, I want to know, is this your first Portrait of a Nevada Learner webinar? This is really class 3. We've done several others. And so seeing a lot of no's, not your first. So good. That's good that you guys are all like experts on this. So you know how this absolutely works. So that's great. I love it. Have a couple new names and faces. Some of you have been around. Tonight, when we talk about the Portrait of Another Learner, those of you that have been around, and we talk about today, we're going to talk about connecting. And I'd really like you to bring out some of the stuff that we've talked about in the past as well, since we have a lot of people that said, nope, not my first one, been here before. Love it. All right, so as you know, this is interesting because later this month, actually, I'm going to be attending Friday the 13th. I know that. I'm going to be attending another large group on the Portrait of Nevada Learner. It started almost 2 years ago. The State Department of Education hired Knowledge Works to come in and think about how to bring in the Portrait of a Nevada Learner, as well as how to bring in competency-based education. We had a large group convening in October of 2022. I happened to be part of that group. And then they brought in teachers to pilot it, and they had students to come in and work in through some of those things with what does it look like in the classroom? What do they want it to look like before they finalize the creation of what that portrait looks like? And let me throw that up into chat. There is a 1-page document that shows the Portrait of a Nevada Learner. So let's look at that, because really what it does is it says there are 4 questions that kids have. They want to know how they want to grow in their learning. That's empowering. They want to know how they can build and sustain relationships or connect with other people, or how do you impact or even contribute, make some type of impact into the world. And they also want to think about, how do I thrive outside of this classroom? There's a whole big world out there. What does that look like to thrive, not just in the classroom, but outside? So again, look at the link that's there in the chat, and what you'll see is the document that actually lays out the 4 areas that we were just talking about. Empowering, which is reflecting on my learning, making sure I'm really curious and self-aware, and having some balance between the supports of growth of physical, emotional, and social. And then tonight, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about connecting. Great time, because guess what? It's the week of respect. So if you look at the question there, it says, how do I build and sustain relationships in community? Well, that starts with collaborating and communicating, but it also has to do with our heart, meaning that we have to understand empathy and respect for multiple diverse backgrounds and experiences. So tonight, when we talk about station rotation, I really want you to think about that connecting part of the learner profile. The others we have are impacting. So you'll notice some of the highlighted words there in impacting, purposeful impact, creative thinkers, problem solvers, civic engagement. So again, in the chat, you can click the link there to get to this one-page document. And our last section is thriving, which is helping kids understand persistence and resilience and grit and integrity. So having those intellectual agilities. So tonight, what I really want us to think about as we talk about station rotation is we're really going to focus on connecting. So the question that lays out here is when I'm thinking about my students and in their head, I always say in their internal voices, they're asking, how do I build and sustain relationships and community? Think about that in your classroom. If you think about how are you doing that? How are you setting up classroom activities and pedagogy and instruction that requires active listening, sharing of ideas, and collaboration? And today, station rotation is really going to hit that a lot. And what we want to talk about is not only just communication, but effective communication, not just orally. That's one way to communicate, but there's so many other ways to communicate through tools and technology. And in your classroom, how are you doing that? I really want you to think about how are you pulling out the portrait of a Nevada learner in your classroom? How are you having the kids communicate effectively? What tools are you using? What technologies are you using? And tonight, you're going to get a lot of information about how to do that. And this last one here is the showing of empathy and respect. And since we're in Respect Week, great time to pull this up, helping kids understand how to work with people that have diverse backgrounds and cultures and experiences, which makes our groups, small groups, right, so much stronger when we have people of a diverse backgrounds. They bring different things to the group. One might be very artistic, one might be mathematically analytical, one might be very verbal, but not very good in writing, but somebody else in their group might be. And that's the great part about having that collective empathy and respect when you're sitting in a small group. So thinking of small groups, we're going to go to some small groups. All right, guys, get ready. When you think of your classroom, go back to your classroom and into your strategies. What type of classroom strategies are you using for connecting? Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Hopefully you guys had some great conversations in your rooms, in your breakout rooms, about classroom strategies that help students connect and really pushing that portrait of a Nevada learner to a higher level. So tonight we're going to talk about station rotation, but before we get into station rotation, I want to talk about the core business of schools. And I truly believe the core business of schools is relationships and learning. And I will tell you, I believe this is a hierarchy. I think relationships come first because kids want you to care about them and they want to care about their peers before they truly want to learn. So it's really important for us to have those connections, to have that respect built in, not only for us and our students, but belong peer to peer before we can get to that learning. So as we go through today, think about how are you building relationships in your classroom before you're really getting to the learning. And then if you've been with us, we started with a learner profile, which is a great way to start with those relationships. All right, so let's talk about setting expectations. If you were with us at the learner profile, we talked a little bit about this. We talked about setting up expectations and having a shared understanding. And that starts with defining what is learning, helping students understand their role in the learning process and your role in the learning process. I truly believe that the teacher's role is to set up this beautiful trail. Just think, imagine you're on a trail and you're looking at the river and you're looking at the leaves and you're looking at the deer that are crossing your track. You're setting up that trail, but it's the students who are going to take the journey. So it really becomes important for them to understand the active engagement that they need to have in that learning, and understanding that together we are co-creators of learning. Matter of fact, I like to say that the teacher is the lead learner in the classroom, because there are some things that those 7-year-olds know better than I do, or even if I'm doing high school, some of those 15 and 16-year-olds, they know technology way better than I do because they've grown up and been around it. So thinking through that shared creators of learning in your classroom, ask yourself or ask your students, what is the definition of learning? And maybe post that in your room and refer to it. Ask them what they think their role is as a student. It's not just to show up, shut up, and not cause any problems. It's really to be actively engaged. And today in station rotation, we're really going to get to that active learning. So to be able to do that, what we have to do is we have to come off of our student-centered teacher and really move into our student-centered. So we're going to come off the stage, right? We're not going to be the only person who's providing knowledge acquisition. We're going to ask the kids to acquire knowledge either by watching a video or reading some articles where we're not the only person giving them the knowledge. And we talked about that in the last class on using digital content to help that out. We want our students to be actively engaging and taking ownership. That means that we need to step off. We can't think of them as passive receptacles to pour information into. We have to think of the pedagogy that will ask them to be active, will ask them to create. So we're changing the way our classroom looks from just test scores and mainly grades to asking our kids to pose questions. And we're asking our kids to self-assess. And you know what? Sometimes they will fail and we'll just say, hey, that's your first attempt at learning. Let's try it again. Because one grade doesn't make anybody's life different, but we don't want our students to think that that one grade makes a difference. What we want them to do is pose a question about what can I do different? How can I do that over? Changing our authority and leadership into more of a teaching by walking around, more of a facilitator, a learning partner, moving our classroom to a more collaborative, supportive environment with stations. I love it. Instead of that competitive, who's got the best score on this, individualistic environment. So we want to make those changes from teacher-centered to that student-centered. And you can see what that means for us. That means that we have to change our mindset and our shift in our practice. So we call this the Portrait of a Nevada Learner Pedagogy series, because we're thinking about the pedagogy that goes on in our classroom and changing that. Yes, we're still going to make lesson plans and we're still going to deliver content, but it's all going to be a little bit different. So we're going to make lesson plans that are like guardrails that says, hey, these are some things that you can choose from where we want to be, but maybe you have a choice of activities. Maybe instead of lecture or reading a book or watching a video, maybe you can say, which one would you like to do? We have 3 different stations, one where you can listen to it on a video or an audio, one where you can read about it, one where you can come to my station and I can lecture or we can engage in discussion about it. And instead of just assigning activities, giving them choice in activities, letting them take the responsibility and taking that burden off of our shoulders and let them assess themselves and let them assess their peers instead of us being the one that's always assessing. If we're the one that's always assessing, then we're giving grades. What we want to do is change that mindset so that they're self-assessing and they're assessing their peers. So they're giving each other grades and helping each other grow into this student-centered learning. So thinking about how that difference where we partner with digital content, where students are taking responsibility, students are self-assessing, posing questions, and going through choices of activities, things are going to look a little bit different is when we pull in this Portrait of a Nevada Learner. So when we shift to that ownership, what we want to do is get rid of stage 1 here, which is that teacher-led where we did most of the working and the students were displaying of evidence of engagement. And I say displaying because I don't know how active their minds were. Their bodies might have been engaged. And sometimes we know that's not always the case. But we want to move to teacher facilitation. You've heard me say guide on the side. This is where the teacher shifts from facilitating and guiding the learning by teaching by walking around. And students start experimenting with their ownership. And hopefully some of you are already there, and that's totally awesome. And our goal in a couple of years from now is really have that co-facilitation where we're really exchanging ideas and strategies and students are taking ownership. And we've got the PNL or the Portrait of a Nevada Learner right there at the top where kids are engaging with academic standards as well as skills to get them into a higher order of thinking. So what that means is when students take ownership, they can articulate. When I go into classrooms, the first thing I love to do is ask students, what are you learning? That's it's low level because they can tell me, oh, we're learning about polynomials, or oh, we're learning about Columbus. But I want to know why they're learning it. So that's where they start getting some understanding. But when they start getting the owning, then I can ask them, well, what strategies are you learning? How do you use these strategies? Have you ever used this strategy before? They could say I'm researching, or they can say I'm putting together a mind map. And I'm like, well, have you used that in other classes? So what we really want to see is that cross pollination, that cross culture of ownership, so that they're not just learning about science in science class, they can think about science in other classes, or math or literacy in other classes. So again, we want to move the kids from doing to understanding to really owning their learning. We did one breakout. We're ready to go do another one. What I really want you to think about is the P&L, the Portrait of a Nevada Learner. We talked about connecting. So what connects with you, all right, or extends your thoughts, as we just took the last 5-10 minutes to talk about student-centered learning. Welcome back, guys. Hope you had good conversations about student-centered learning and that transition, not only in the classroom activities, but also in the pedagogy and the instructional practices that you're having in your classroom. So let's get into, it's almost nearly the bottom of the hour. Let's get into the guts of tonight. Let's really get into station rotation. And when I talk about station rotation, I'm going to talk about blended learning, because I always want to bring in digital content to make my life easier, as well as, these students live in this technology world. So we need to help them not with just consumption, like social media, where they're just looking at things, but thinking about technology as a learning tool. So let's talk about blended learning via station rotation. So when I talk about blended learning, I use the term blended personalized learning, because as a former math teacher, here's this very simple equation. I want the wisdom of the teachers. You guys are so smart that most of you probably already have a master's degree. You know your standards inside and out. You know your kids. You have relationship with your kids and their families. You have this wisdom that no technology could ever replace. But if we can add your wisdom with the adaptability of technology, and y'all know how I feel about technology, because if you've been with me, you've heard me say before that technology is great. It can deliver content, but it delivers low level content. What I would say is DOK level 1 and 2, or Webb's depth of knowledge 1 and 2, which is just that low level stuff, so that we could push those kids to the higher order of our standards. So if we take those two things, your wisdom plus the adaptability of technology, then we can create a personalized, and that's where blended personalized learning comes in. I can create a personalized learning space for each and every student in my classroom. Now, you've probably heard me say 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. If you look up there, you see 3 images. Well, that's where our thirds come in. I believe that in the classroom, we should be thinking about, in a unit of study, not every day, not every lesson, but in a unit of study, thinking about 1/3 of the time when I can release DOK level 1 and 2 to digital content. It could be videos, audios, it could be IXL, it could be ReadWorks. I want to release that learning to digital content. And 1/3 of the time, I want to release the learning so my students can get to higher order thinking to my students in active engagement, peer to peer, right? And this is where I might bring in the tools, where just a moment ago, we talked about communicating with technology tools, where they're demonstrating their knowledge with tools. And 1/3 of the time, we're going to take the lead. That could, yes, be a lecture or a Socratic seminar or a small group or creating playlists for our kids. But if we think about this balance, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 2/3 of the time out there on the edges, when I release to my students in small groups, and when I release to the technology to deliver DOK level 1 and 2, that means 2/3 of the time I get to do that teaching by walking around, and I can build relationships with my students. So that's why this is so important, this 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, because really what it reminds me is that 2/3 of the time I should be out there working on student relationships. I should be working on interventions on kids that need one-on-one attention. And that's where we're going to really talk tonight about our stations. When you think of the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, that could be a station rotation. It's right. It could be 1/3 of the time on digital content, 1/3 of the time with peer-to-peer activities, and 1/3 of the time with the teacher. Now, the difference here is they have a common thread. So if my digital content is some reading stuff and my peer-to-peer is not in the reading or literacy content, it's not really station rotation. At that point in time, it's just stations or centers. So the key thing about station rotation is we want to have that common thread among the three stations. So when they're teachers with them, they're talking about mathematics. When they go and do their digital curriculum, they're listening to stuff about mathematics. When they're doing their peer-to-peer activities, engaged in the 4Cs, communication, collaboration, connectivity, and critical thinking, or possibly doing real-world applications of mathematics. So that's what we want to do is when we're thinking about station rotation, there's that common thread among the three stations. And I only say three because we talked about thirds, but you could have just two. Two makes a station rotation. You could have as many as seven. Seven makes a station rotation. So again, the difference between station rotation is that the activities are similar in content, meaning that it's the same standard. I'm still focused on the same thing. Learning centers oftentimes are, you're going to go over here and do some social studies, and then over here I want you to go into your iReady. The key here, though, guys, is really important, is that we have data from our technology, from our digital curriculum partner, that will help us differentiate those small groups. For example, if I have data inside of my iReady that says I have 5 kids that are excelling, they're going to go to a different group than the 7 kids that need intervention. They're going to probably come with a group with me. That's the difference between centers oftentimes and station rotation, is that connectivity of the standards, and as well as using data to inform how we set up those small groups and those pathways. Now, when we're thinking about differentiation, there's 4 different ways that you can differentiate. You can differentiate from the content. For example, we could be learning about, I don't know, Columbus. We'll pick on Columbus. But there's different ways to get content from Columbus. You can get it in a video, you can get it in audio, you could read it, you could have a short story about it, you could do some research about it. There's different places that you can get content. So when you're thinking about doing your stations, knowing your kids, and hopefully if you've done learner profiles, you know which ones they like and how they can get content and process faster. And that's when we talk about processing, is how they learn. Well, which way, what way do the kids learn best? Do they learn through discussion? Do they learn through oral? Are they kinesthetic? Do we need to bring in some hands-on, right? And we want to think about differentiating through product. When we do that, that might mean that one kid is turning in an essay, but another kid may be creating a video on the same topic. They have different assessments, but they're both showing mastery of a content. Now, to be able to do that, sometimes we have to differentiate the environment. Like when I do workshops, sometimes I tell people, you don't have to stay in this room. You can go out into the hall. Well, some students say that it's really hard for them when the lights are all on. It's just too bright in the classroom. So maybe we need to take the lights down. Some students say they really need quiet. Other students like to have a little background music. So thinking about how you can differentiate the environments as well. So let's get deep into station rotation. I'm going to go ahead and use the thirds for just a moment. I'm going to say a third of the time we're going to use technology, a third of the time we're going to do a group thing, and a third of the time we're going to have a teacher station. So imagine that these are my rotations. Now, I have 3 groups. I have group A, B, and C. The data has told me that group A is a bunch of learners who need to start with a teacher. And the reason they need to start with a teacher is because they have some gaps, and I know that these are students that need me to tell them what to do. They're not very good at oral instruction, or not very good at reading instructions, or even if they watch a video, they don't know what to do with it. So I want to start with group A in my first rotation. Now, my group B, they're a little bit of independent. They don't need as much teacher time. They can go ahead and do the independent DOK level 1 and 2 digital curriculum, and they can start in that first rotation. Now, my data says that there's a bunch of learners that are strong and they need less teacher time. So I'm going to start them in a collaborative station. So you'll notice in that first rotation, group A is with me, group B is independent, and group C is in a collaborative. When we go to rotation 2, now I need to bring in my B learners. I know that they've had a little bit of time on the computer, and I need to see if they're understanding. My group A that's had time with me to get started, I don't want to go to independent just yet because I'm not really sure. I want my A group to go to peer-to-peer. And my C group now gets to go to independent. By the third rotation, I'm bringing group C to me. Now, notice group A is probably going to have a different need to get started. Group B, when I bring them in, I know that they already have a little background knowledge, so I can probably press them a little bit more. But Group C, they've already collaborated. They've already done their DOK level 1 and 2 in their digital content. So when they come to me, I'm ready to really assess them. So even my small group rotation with my kids looks different with Group A, B, and C because those kids have different needs. So another way to think about your teacher-led groups is they don't have to be equal because your kids aren't equal. They need to be equitable. So Catlin Turner, I love Catlin Turner. She's like the goddess of station rotation. If you've seen any of her stuff, she gave us this diagram of how we can use our small group teacher led. Like number one there in the blue column might be what I would do with my group A. I really need to hook them. I need to get them discussing and defining and just get them ready before I push them off into small groups or independent learning. My C group, they get it. They've already been doing things. They've already been discussing with their peers. They've already got into the individual content. Now it's really time for me to do a quick assessment and see what their needs are. So thinking about that small group, it doesn't have to be the same for every group of kids. So when you're thinking about what does it look like? Could it be I do, we do, you do? Could it be a homework check? Could it be just some real-time feedback with a discussion? Or does it need to be a quick assessment? I want to ask you in chat, guys. I know some of you have done station rotation. Maybe some of you haven't. Go to chat, give me a number. 1, meaning that station rotation is new to me. 2, meaning I've heard of it, but I've never done it. 3, I've tried it a few times. And 4 is its regular practice. Got a bunch of 2s and 3s. There's a 4. Awesome. A 1, 2s, 3s. Okay, a lot of 2s and 3s. Got some 4s, got some 3.5s. Love it. Awesome. Station rotation is just one thing that you can pull out of your toolbox to try and use. So let's talk about how you might be using it or how you could try to use it. Because I saw a couple 1s and I definitely saw several 2s. All right, so let's talk about planning. When you plan for station rotation, think about backwards design. What is it that you really, really want? What are the big ideas and skills? That one thing that's going to keep all of our stations, connected. And then we can think about the tasks that we can do. Do I want them to read? Do I want them to watch articles? Do I want to bring in digital content? Do I want them to practice on maybe IXL? So you can start thinking about the tasks that you could have those kids doing. And then and only then we'll start thinking about the learning experiences. The types of stations you can have, of course, we've already talked about. You could have a station with digital learning when you release to your digital partner, letting them deliver DOK level 1 and 2. You could have a station where you're instructing. You don't have to. You can use this opportunity to do a bunch of teaching by walking around. You could set up a collaborative station, an independent station, and a digital station. You could have 3 different stations, one that's collaborating, one where they're doing independent work on a worksheet or in some IXL software, and one where they're learning content, maybe looking at Khan Academy and doing some digesting of something, and then you can do teaching by walking around. If you are new to station rotation, I would suggest taking and doing stations where you're not needed yet. That way you can help your students with their behaviors and expectations while you can do teaching by walking around rather than trying to do it while you're sitting behind 5 or 6 kids. So one thing I believe in when we're lesson planning, I always believe that you should always open your class. There should always be a class opener and there should always be a lesson closer. And then you could have your stations in between there. You can have anywhere up to 2 stations, right? Then that becomes a station rotation because we can flop them. We could have 3 with a rotation. So there's lots of different ways, but you always want to open it and you always want to close it. And when you're doing your stations, think about starting small. Think about limiting the time. Oftentimes people have tried station rotations. They're like, oh, the kids need to do this for 20 minutes. 20 minutes might not be the right amount of time the first time your kids do stations because in the first 3 minutes they're bored. So start them small. Start with two stations, do some teaching by walking around, make it just 5 minutes. Don't even give them enough time to finish what they're working on. So hopefully they can say, okay, well, then we need more time. And then you can say, okay, we're going to do this first, and then we can come back to stations. What we want to do is we want to build up that ownership. We want to build up that behavior and expectations in learning and co-teaching, right? We want to build up that ability to work and connect with each other without grading on each other's nerves. So this becomes really important, that when you start with station rotation, start small. Little successes along the way. Oftentimes when I hear people say, oh, I've tried it, it didn't work. Well, oftentimes what I'm seeing is they didn't do a differentiated. They tried to do the same thing in every station. Well, not every kid needs the same thing. And they don't need the same amount of time in each station either. So that's another way to think through it. Oftentimes my peers in secondary school, and I was a high school math teacher for 10 years, they'll tell me, oh, we can't do station rotations because our periods are too short. Hey guys, I was at SECTA. We had 43-minute periods. Imagine an opening and closing, and I got to do stuff in between here. And I had things that I needed to get done, and I'm not going to be the only one delivering it. So I set up stations, and those stations were rotated during the week. So the stations we would have would be spiral review, digital learning, collaborative, and we would rotate through them. So one group would do A, B, and C, and the other group would come in and they would do BCA, and then the last group is CBA. You can see I can rotate through the days. It doesn't have to be within a single lesson. And the cool thing about this is I can pull small groups at any given time. If I'm using spiral review, digital learning, and collaborative, notice there's no teacher station. Well, if I'm looking at the data and I'm like, oh my gosh, this student was absent yesterday, maybe I need to catch them up first. I can do a small pull out and pull those 2 or 3 kids that were absent yesterday, get them up to speed, and then put them back out into their stations. So that's the nice thing. If we don't put ourselves in a station right away, we can do that teaching by walking around, thinking through what can help us get through those things. Now, remember, every day you always open and you always close. So how do we start? Figure out what kids need to be in what groups. Bluebirds, redbirds, yellowbirds, greenbirds, right? List the kids that are going to be in the groups. You could do it this way. You could say the left half of the classroom is going to do this piece. The right half of the classroom is going to be doing this piece. So thinking about how you're going to break up your groups. Do you want them to just be, heterogeneous where you don't care who goes into what groups, or do you want the data to drive where you're at? And if you have them as colors, maybe Carlos, who's number 3 on green, tomorrow needs to be in yellow. Or Brandon, who's number 6 in red, needs to move to green when we go to reading. So make sure that the colors aren't stagnant, right? And the groups aren't stagnant. And you can set up your station rotation like this in your elementary, where the yellow group goes straight across, just like we talked about a moment ago, from tech, collaborative to teacher. The red group goes from teacher, tech to collaboration. And the last group, your green group there, is going to go through collaboration, teacher, and tech. So setting through, this one says it's going to be 20 minutes in each group. What I always think when I have that is you need to have a fallback. A fallback might be when you get done with whatever you're working on, or oftentimes I'll say, don't give them enough time to get done. If you don't give them enough time to get done, then you won't have any behavior problems. Stations is something that oftentimes this is where relationships and trust and respect become really, really important between the teacher and the students, so that they're not misbehaving and moving off. So one of the ways to do that is making sure that you have routines and procedures and expectations before you go to stations. So thinking about, how do I set up these transitions? When do the kids know that they're supposed to rotate? How do I get the materials out to the kids? Maybe I have them in little baggies and they're sitting there. How do I call and response system? So like I like to do a 3 callback. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. Why? Because it gives about 30 seconds for people to take their conversations down and come together. Sometimes I'll do a callback that says, when I say mighty, you say Mustangs. Mighty, they yell out Mustangs, mighty, yell out Mustangs, and then really loud mighty, and then Mustangs, right? That callback response again gives them time to not have to be immediately eyes on you. If you've used slant or champs, I would highly suggest those are 2 great routines or procedures in your classroom. Another way is thinking about asking for help. You could have somebody in your room like Lisa. You can say, Lisa, today I want you to be the help person. If somebody needs help, you're going to be the first support. You're going to be the student support that goes over and helps them. And also I've seen the ask 3 before me, especially if I'm running a teacher station. You need to have expectations on when they can interrupt you if you're running a teacher station. So thinking through your routines and your procedures. I took the first week of school in mathematics, and I would tell my kids, how fast can we get down into group of 3s? How fast can we get down in group of 4s? How fast can we get down in group of 5s? And then we would actually practice that. And I've done practicing of rotations. It's like, okay, guys, it's time to rotate. And we could physically move to the rotations. Now, I know that high school kids are nesters. In other words, I don't want to move them. They got all this garbage, their coats, their backpacks, their, you name it. They got tons of garbage. And so they are nesting into their seat. They do not want to move. Well, that's when I move signs. I'll create an 8x10 sign and I'll put it on this table and say, you guys are a collaborative station. And then I have another 8x10 sign over on another one that says this is digital content. Well, the kids don't have to move. All I have to do is pick up the sign and switch the signs and say, now you are working on something else. So think about what those routines, those transitions, and how those expectations will go through. Now, this is the best part. I got to tell you, this is the part you're going to love because you want kids connecting with accountability. So when you have that student station rotation, you want there to be some accountability. So oftentimes I use shared slides. I'll use templates in different formats. So if you see here right underneath there, number 2, it says team 2, that is actually Iron Chef. I've created an Iron Chef slide where the kids put in their names, their information, their image, and their secret sauce, as it would be. Up at the top, partnership number 1 is kind of like what you would call a cyber sandwich, where I have one kid's going to an article where you can see the icon there is an article and it actually links to an article, and one kid's going to a video. Same content, but receiving it in different ways. And then we would do a cyber sandwich where they would each talk a little bit about it and then come together and what they learn. All right, so I'm going to show you what this looks like. So when we were in Albuquerque, one of the things that we did where we had 2 people, one was going to an article, another person was going to an article, and they would add their thoughts on it. So again, you can see Seth and Kelly worked on this. I can see who worked and what they came up with. So again, this is very similar to a cyber sandwich. One of the other ones that we did together is we did one like here where we had different resources. So the Eisenhower matrix, we had 2 people working on that, collecting information, getting things done, as well as some time schedules. And at the end, we had a walkabout. The other ones that we've had is we've done ones with videos where these 2 people said, I'm going to watch this video, and they collaborated. I'm going to throw up into chat my templates. It's a forced copy, but these are some templates that you guys can see. And if you want to use them, you're welcome to use them. So it's a kind of a cool way to have accountability with connecting. So again, in chat, you're seeing the link to my shared slides, and it's going to do a forced copy so that you can have your own copies. But think about how you're going to have accountability in your groups and require those kids to really work together. So that's one way of doing it. The other thing I like to do when I do groups is I like to have them monitor their own time. So let me ask you guys, how many of you have seen Classroom Screen? Give me a thumbs up. I love Classroom Screen. The reason I love Classroom Screen is that it allows students to monitor their own time. See, with Classroom Screen, I can put up there how loud I want them to get. I can tell them what they're working on, and I can have a timer up there so that they're able to monitor their own time in that group. Now, of course, I'm going to give them a 2-minute warning, or I'm going to give them, a 30-second warning. And yes, Christina, it is free. That's why I absolutely love it. It's not an application. It's a web browser. You just pull up a web page. And again, it's classroomscreen.com. If you haven't been using it, guys, definitely use it. It's one that I absolutely love. When we're thinking about getting the 5 hours, now you don't have to do the assignment if you don't want to, but think about when you're going on to do your station rotations. Create systems. I would start with creating systems first. If you haven't defined learning, if you haven't defined the roles, if you haven't defined what respect looks like in your classroom, if you haven't defined those types of things, when you first send them to groups, they're going to sit there and do nothing because they don't think there's any expectations. So it becomes really important for you to put those systems and those expectations in place first before you do station rotation. Number 2 here is to start small, just a couple of stations. 2 is a station rotation. This half of the room, you're going to go work on digital content. This half of the room, you're going to read this article. And I'll be back with you in 5 minutes. Again, because I'm limiting the short time frame. Now, ideally, I want a peer-to-peer. I want to make sure that if I'm going to do small groups, I can say, okay, this half of the room, you're going to work together on this slide deck. And one of the things I might pull up is I might pull up the Iron Chef, which takes 4 people, right? Have them get together in the Iron Chef and have another group before, have them do together Iron Chef. Do those types of things so that there's that accountability and that connectivity. Because what I really want when we're thinking of station rotation, we're trying to get them to connect. We're trying to get them to communicate, trying to get them to collaborate, trying to them to build empathy and respect. That's number 3, is helping students build ownership in their own learning and understanding that we're not solo in this world. Sometimes I have to lean on somebody else. I'm not a great artist. Maybe somebody in my group's a great artist. Together we can make a great product. So those are one of the things that we want to think about as you're going through and you're going to get started.